All right, everyone, we'll get started. Thank you guys all for joining us on this Thursday night. We so appreciate you guys coming here and spending this hour with us as we do our webinar. Just in some introduction, so my name is Kris. I am the clinical lead here at DBT of South Jersey. I am a licensed professional counselor and one of 10 DBT certified clinicians in New Jersey, and this is
Cailyn. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Cailyn, and I am an intern at DBT of South Jersey. I am working towards earning my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, and I started here the end of May, and I've been loving it, and just so grateful to be here and learn from great clinicians like Kris here.
All right, so just some announcements before we get started. So thank you guys for coming. Over this weekend, probably around Sunday, you will receive a link in your email in order to watch the replay. So if you want to go back and watch a part of the webinar or you wanted to review something, you will have that replay probably sometime this weekend. You will receive that. Check your spam box. Sometimes they accidentally end up in there. These webinars are also live on our public YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and type in DBT of South Jersey, we have a whole channel with this webinar, as well as webinars in the past. So if you're interested in checking out one of our past topics, or you want to share this webinar with a friend or family member, you are welcome to access our YouTube channel where you can rewatch these things and check them out. Other noteworthy events that we're having, if you're interested in other things, DBT of South Jersey, we offer a family support group. This month's topics is DBT overview and dialectics. This is run by our clinician, Ashley Barton, and it runs this month on Monday, November 28th at 7:15 p.m. We have another DBT skills session webinar with Chrissy and Julia coming up in December. This theme is The Holidays Are Coming and DBT Skills to Thrive. And this will be hosted on Thursday, December 8th from 5 to 6 p.m. So be sure to sign up on our website. We also offer mindful yoga with Alex. It's offered not only in person, but virtually. And this runs on Monday, December 5th at 6 p.m. You can log in via Zoom or come to our Voorhees office to use it. You can email Alex directly if you wish to attend in person. All Zoom signups are on our website. And these are all free workshops. Everything I just mentioned is free, so please come out and enjoy. We have a lot of these services to get more involved in the community. So please check out our website. You can see them under the tabs on the top, and feel free to sign up. So we are going to jump into our webinar. As we go, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We may answer some in the moment. We may save some for the end. We'll leave some time for questions at the end as well. But if you have any questions, feel free to stick them in there and we'll be sure to get to them. All right. So our webinar today is Too Much Emotion or Not Enough. And we're going to teach you really to learn how to find your sweet spot and avoid emotional overwhelm. So the first thing we really want to spend some time talking about is the window of tolerance. And if you've never done DBT therapy before, you may be wondering, what is the window of tolerance that I keep hearing about with my therapist or with other DBT people? And your window of tolerance is what we would call your sweet spot. So this is the optimal arousal area in which we can function and thrive. So in less clinical sounding language, I often say your window of tolerance is where you can feel different emotions, but it's not overwhelming you. So I think we can all relate to a time where maybe emotion came rushing in unexpectedly and we felt out of control, or the emotion felt way too big and we weren't able to think clearly, right? I'm sure there's been times where we all have made a mistake from an emotion mind place. And the window of tolerance is where you can feel these emotions, but they're not controlling us and our behaviors. We're in control of the emotion. And this helps us really stay on task towards our goals. Sometimes when our emotions are much too big, we make decisions or we may do behaviors that don't align with our long-term goals or wouldn't be what we would normally do. I often think of the emotion anger. I feel like this one's really relatable for being out of our window of tolerance. But when we have anger, sometimes we say or do things or yell. And then when we calm down, we're like, oh no, I should not have said that, or I should not have done that. And we're human and we're fallible. And yet to maintain relationships, to maintain employment, to feel good and confident about ourselves, acting from anger in a way that's not in our values is not ideal. And so in an ideal world, we would be in our window of tolerance all the time and be able to feel emotions in tolerable ranges. However, unfortunately, if you are like me, we're all human beings and all human beings are fallible. So even us therapists sitting here today can have examples of times where we left our window of tolerance and made mistakes from emotion mind places. I often tell the story of a time where I was making dinner with my husband and he was trying to point out to me that I was cutting the potatoes incorrectly per the recipe. And I snapped at him and was like, don't tell me what to do. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't even cook. And that totally came from a place of anger. And when I was able to regulate myself using my DBT skills, mind you, I read that he was correct. The recipe wanted them in triangles and I was cutting them lengthwise. So that's an example of a fallible therapist right here, right now. And so I would say, don't judge yourself if you have fallible moments, right? They're learning experiences and you will not be in your window of tolerance 100% of the time. It's going to be something that we end up leaving. And so that's really what the purpose of this is to help gain awareness of when am I leaving my window of tolerance? And then how do I get back into it? And we're actually going to teach you 2 skills tonight out of many crisis survival skills to try and help you when you observe that. So hang tight, that is coming later on in this presentation. So a little more about this window of tolerance. So it's kind of sandwiched between 2 other states. So if we start at the top of this graph, we have your hyperarousal. So your hyperarousal is when you are feeling way too much. I often say this is when you're feeling emotions much too intensely. So this is when emotions kind of jump in the driver's seat and run away with you. And it could be any emotion. It could be activating emotions like anger and fear, or it could be inhibiting emotions like sadness, shame, and guilt. When we're in this hyperarousal, we often feel overwhelmed by emotions. It can result in us feeling high levels of fear, pain, anger, shame. You may notice you're more sensitive in this range. And so things that might not bother you as much may bother you more so, or things that don't normally get under your skin may irritate you more easily. Oftentimes when we are in a state of hyperarousal, we often do what the emotion tells us. So if we're angry, we yell. If we're sad, we cry. And we often don't think about the long-term consequences of any behaviors that those emotions may tell us to do. In this state, we also have a very difficult time calming ourselves down and often give into impulsive behaviors. A lot of times, if you struggle with impulsive behaviors, it often comes from a hyper-aroused state. When we're feeling way too much, we often look for immediate gratification to make ourselves feel better. And so hyperarousal often gives way to ineffective anger behaviors, self-harming behaviors, suicidal thoughts, eating disorder behaviors, substance use, and those kinds of things, because we're looking for immediate impulsive ways to calm down. And in the moment they might work, but in the long term, they're not effective, which is also why we want to use our DBT skills to get back into that window of tolerance. On the other side of your window of tolerance, we have that hypoarousal. The imagery I often use for hypoarousal is imagine you are in a canoe on the clearest lake you've ever seen. The water is completely flat like glass. There's no wind. It's like the most beautiful day on the planet. And if you look over the side of the canoe, as peaceful as it is, there's sharks swimming in the water. And that's the metaphor I use for hypoarousal, because In hypoarousal, we are often avoiding or numbing emotions, and it feels very peaceful because we've been successful in avoiding those emotions and avoiding situations that could bring up emotions. And yet, if you were to take that layer of numbness away, the sharks in the water, AKA your emotions, would come rushing in and attack you. And so that sometimes means that we flip-flop from hypo to hyperarousal and skip your window of tolerance entirely. In hypoarousal, we often can avoid close relationships. We can shut down, dissociate. Oftentimes I see clients who use sleeping as a coping mechanism. That is a form of hypoarousal. I'm avoiding emotions, I'm avoiding reality, and I am not dealing with the problem or the emotion at hand. And instead I'm going to sleep. In more extreme forms of dissociation, people kind of go into a state where they're not responding or unable to hear or respond to their environment. Or people often avoid thinking about anything that could be painful or bring up emotions. And you might be sitting here being like, Kris, my window of tolerance is like this big. Like I go from one to the other so quickly, I don't even hit a window of tolerance. And if you're one of those people, that's completely normal. Welcome to therapy. We can help. Call our intake line. But that's normal. Sometimes people don't have a very big window of tolerance. And you may notice that you have a different window of tolerance for different emotions. And it all goes back to what messages were we given about emotions? Was it safe to feel emotions? And those kinds of things. Because if you were never taught how to feel, then it's going to be really difficult for you to know how to let an emotion come in. And that's part of the therapeutic work some clients have to do here is learning, how do I feel an emotion? How do I sit with an emotion? How do I even identify an emotion? And then working from there to expand our window of tolerance to feel a wider array of intensities, which brings me to my next slide. I do see there's a question, but let's see. It says, what if your intense emotions have been active for so long that you go numb and start dissociating? The emotions are still there and still intense, becomes numbing. Are you in hypo or hyperarousal? That's a great question. Thank you so much for sending that. I would say if you are dissociating, but you know the emotion is underneath it, you are probably in a hypoarousal. It kind of goes back to that, like everything, you can't really feel it, but you know it's underneath. And so that would be a sign of hypoarousal. Good question. All right, keep them coming. So as you can see here, I use this as an example of when to use your different DBT skills. I often get a lot of questions about what skills do I use when? How do I know what skills I should be using? And so I made this graphic. If there's one on the internet, shout it out to me. I think I created this myself, but I could always be wrong. And this is just an example of a window of tolerance. Again, you might not notice your window of tolerance is a 1 to a 7. Your window of tolerance might be a 1 to a 3, and that's fine. Don't judge it. Again, it goes back to what messages were you given about emotions? How were you taught to feel emotions? And some of the practices learning how to expand that window of tolerance and get comfortable with a wider range. So don't judge yourself if you're like sitting here and being like, my window of tolerance is not this big. That's totally fine. Start where you're at. No judgments allowed. So as you can see, we have our 3 states. We have the hypoarousal, and as you can see, the smiley on that left-hand side is pretty flat. He's not really experiencing a whole lot. And if you're in hypoarousal, that's also saying you're out of your window of tolerance. So you might be confused because it's like, oh, I'm numb. I'm not feeling this intensity where I'm in crisis. But if we're avoiding, right, it's because underneath that layer of numbness, there is a high level of emotion, right? We avoid pain. Our brains are really good at finding ways to avoid pain. And so hypoarousal is our brain's way of avoiding pain by dissociating or numbing. And so if you're avoiding that emotion, it says that it's much too intense. And so we want to use our distress tolerance skills to get back in. And Cailyn's going to tell us more about what those are and how to use them. So hang tight. We'll be more information coming shortly. So again, if you're numbing, use your distress tolerance skills briefly to get back in your window. The big thing about distress tolerance skills, as you can see, they're only on the ends because you can burn them out. If I'm constantly using distress tolerance skills, they're going to become less effective for me. And so we don't want to use them the minute we feel a smidge of anxiety or you feel a little bit of anger, right? We want to practice tolerating emotions to gain that bigger window. So distress tolerance skills should only be used when you're in that hyper, feeling way too much, and hypo when you're feeling way too little, because we don't want to burn them out or use them too frequently. One of the distress tolerance skills is a distraction skill, but if you distract all day to avoid things, that's ineffective. You're not going to be able to do the things you need to do. And so again, that's why you see that they're not listed here in this middle. So when you're in your window of tolerance, where that middle smiley is, where he's feeling good, that's where we use most of our DBT skills. So when you're in a place where you're regulated, you can use your interpersonal effectiveness skills. So these are DBT skills aimed at communicating with other people. So it could be making requests, saying no to things, ending relationships, starting relationships, etc. And we can't do that for feeling too much or too little, right? If you're in a panic attack, you're not going to be asking someone to take you to the store later. You're feeling way too intense. Your brain probably can't formulate that because you're overwhelmed. So when you're in your window is the most effective time to use those skills. We also want to use our emotion regulation skills. So these are our baseline skills to change emotions, to practice feeling emotions, to being able to identify emotions, and also to reduce our vulnerabilities to emotions. And that's when our mindfulness is going to be the most in tune. Again, when you're in a panic attack, it's probably not helpful to observe and describe how your panic is coming up for you, right? We want to get back in that window and feel better. But when we're in our window, we can use our observe and describe skill. We can participate, make effective choices, access that wise mind. And so when you're in your window, a lot of the bulk of the work can happen. And all the way on the right-hand side there, you see that smiley is in distress. He is not feeling very good. That is that hyperarousal, so feeling too intensely. And that's, again, when we want to use that distress tolerance skill. This skill set is really aimed at decreasing the intensity of the emotion. And I think as a big disclaimer, I always want to hammer home that distress tolerance skills are not there to change your emotion. That is one of the skills in emotion regulation. Distress tolerance skills are really aimed at how do I reduce the intensity to perfect ineffective behaviors. And Cailyn's going to hit on that more in just a minute.
Yes, so I know Kris has given us some background information about our distress tolerance skills. And so the goals of our distress tolerance skills are, number one, is to tolerate and to get through crisis situations without making them worse. So oftentimes when we're outside of our window of tolerance, so in that hypo arousal state, it is difficult for us to act in wise mind. A lot of the times, impulse reactions are at the forefront of our mind because we are experiencing really intense emotions. And so the number one goal of our distress tolerance skills is to survive when we're in crisis situations without making them worse. So not acting out of impulse in order to get through the situation and all the feelings of overwhelm that is oftentimes present when we are leaning into our distress tolerance skills. The second goal is to accept reality as it is in the moment. So like Kris said, it's not, for our distress tolerance skills, it's not about changing how we feel in that moment. It is about surviving and to make decisions that are effective and not making our situation worse or adding to our distress. And then the third main goal is to become free of having to satisfy demands of our own desires, urges, and intense emotions. And over here in our second little square, the ability to tolerate and accept distress is essential, because you might be sitting there thinking, like, why do I have to tolerate and accept these intense and really difficult, oftentimes painful emotions? I'm going to tell you. So number one is pain and distress are part of life, right? So pain is inevitable. but suffering does not have to be. They cannot be entirely avoided or removed. So pain and distress are a part of life, and they're going to come up for us, and we need to accept that, because if we fight that and don't accept it, then inevitably we will just perpetuate and maintain our pain until it turns into suffering, and we don't want that. Secondly, distress tolerance is a part of any attempt to change yourself. So while our distress tolerance skills aren't used, or the goal of them isn't to change our emotion in that moment, our distress tolerance skills are fall into the acceptance skill category, but the main point there is that acceptance eventually leads to change. So we first have to accept our situation before we can change it. And the third point here, these skills are needed when we can't immediately change a situation for the better, or when we can't sort out our feelings well enough to know what changes we want or how to make them. So Kris was talking a little bit about this in that beautiful illustration and graph that she created. When we're on the left and right side of hyper and hypoarousal, and when we need to lean into our distress tolerance skills first, leaning into them first is going to be the most effective, because oftentimes when we are feeling those intense emotions and in a crisis and feeling very overwhelmed, we need to first practice distress tolerance in order to get into a place of tapping into wise mind. So it totally makes sense that when we're in a crisis, it's going to be really difficult to access that and tap into wise mind. So utilizing our distress tolerance skills first will be the most effective to get us to a place where we're able to follow it up with our other DBT skills, like our core mindfulness skills and emotion regulation skills, as we move towards our window of tolerance.
Definitely. And I think these are really important too. Has anyone ever gotten that phone call and we're like, your mom calls you and they're like, call me. And then you call them back and they don't answer and you're like, oh my God, what is going on? Am I in trouble? Is someone else in trouble? Like that is a time where you might need some distress tolerance skills. So there's going to be situations like that number 3 point here, where you might have to wait. If you get in an argument with your spouse and they need to calm down, you know, that's where these things need to happen, where you have to tolerate the moment, even if it is really painful. And again, like Cailyn was saying, that's where these skills come in, of trying not to let emotions get the best of us, make situations worse, react to things that aren't happening in that moment, or just waiting until I can get to a solution. And not to say like this is easy. I think distress tolerance skills are really hard, because in the moment your brain is going haywire and you're like, what does the D and DBT stand for? Are we doing diabolical therapy? And it's like, no, dialectical. And so it can be really hard to remember these skills. So something to think about too, as you walk away with 2 fresh skills today, is it's all about practice. Mm-hmm. And the more you practice this, because it's a new language, it's a new way of doing things. So the more you can practice and the more you put reminders places, the more likely you're going to use them. Because when your brain's going haywire, if you're hyper aroused or you're numbed out and disconnected in that hypo, you're not thinking of this. So whatever you can do to put reminders is going to help you also make sure that we don't make situations worse while we're waiting to solve them. So I know we got another really great question in the chat here. Someone asked, how can you tell the difference between numbing, disconnection, or avoidance versus calm and content? I often think I'm feeling good without realizing my body's offline. So what I kind of recommend for this is taking kind of a scan of your body. So dissociation is a numbing where we feel disconnected in some way, where things don't feel real. We don't feel like, sometimes like you won't feel like your fingertips. You'll lose time. And so I say that the warning signs that we're dissociating is feeling physically disconnected from our bodies and emotions, having a hard time like tangibly feeling things, noticing feeling spacey, noticing losing periods of time, like, oh, 20 minutes have passed. How did that happen? Those are signs we might be dissociating. I think numbing two is when we're not able to identify any emotion. So we can feel content and still have a little bit of anxiety, or we can feel content, but noticing a little bit of joy is there. So content and calm is more where you're still pretty connected and present in the moment, as well as you may observe that there might be other feelings underneath that contentment that aren't that large at the moment. And if you have a follow-up question to that, feel free to put that in the chat. We're happy to keep talking about it. All right.
Okay, so these are two of our tried and true DBT distress tolerance skills to utilize that will help you get towards and move into your window of tolerance. So tapping into that and moving closer to that window, moving out of hyper or hypoarousal. So the first skill that we're going to talk a little bit about is our STOP skill, and both of these are acronyms. I think it's on the next few slides. Spells out what each letter stands for. But first, our STOP skill can prevent you from acting impulsively on your emotions in ways that make a difficult situation worse. It also helps individuals resist acting on the first impulse to act, and to stop yourself from reacting and to help you stay in control. So with Kris's example, with her husband making potatoes, that would have been a great time, right, for our STOP skill there. Because oftentimes anger, like Kris was explaining a little bit about anger, when we're feeling that intense emotion, and oftentimes it's one of those emotions that make us go from 0 to 100, right? And the difference between your window of tolerance you might have for each emotion. Anger is definitely one of those for a lot of people, and that's common. And so it really does take practice, because when you go from 0 to 100, when you experience that really quick dysregulation, it's hard to practice or be skillful sometimes in those moments, which is why practicing is so important. And it helps a lot of times, like anger, I think of if you're in a fight with a person and if say they say something that's really hurtful to you or hurts your feelings, and oftentimes that first impulse reaction is to maybe say something back, and that first reaction is to say something back, hurtful words to them, something you know that might hurt them. And obviously that oftentimes does not align with our short or long-term goals. So that's our STOP skill. We're going to dive into it a little deeper in a minute. And then our second skill we're going to be talking about is TIP. So TIP is all about the mind-body connection and changing your body chemistry, which in turn will change the way that we experience our emotions, or get us back regulated pretty quickly. So to reduce extreme emotion mind fast, TIP is designed to activate the human body's physiological nervous system for decreasing arousal. So we have here for TIP, we're really focusing on activating our parasympathetic nervous system, because that calms us down and decreases and de-escalates those pretty intense emotions that we'll be feeling when we're using these skills and turning towards our distress tolerance skills. And then lastly here, TIP skills regulate emotions. Yep, I just said that. By increasing activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. Yeah, I think that's all I have for now about the
And just to clarify for those of you following along, distress tolerance skills are divided into two sections, which is the crisis survival skills, which is surviving the crisis situations, not making them worse, exactly what Cailyn was saying, and your reality acceptance skills, which is about accepting reality as it is and not fighting reality, increasing our suffering. And these two skills are from the toolkit of your crisis survival. So as Cailyn was saying with the stop, this is really about reducing impulsivity and really trying to reduce your emotion mind.
Thank you, Kris. So here we have stop, and it's broken down into the steps and the steps to practice this skill when we're utilizing it. So first, the S in stop stands for stop. That's a pretty easy one to remember. So first step is to not react, which we touched on can be difficult when we are experiencing intense emotions, but it takes practice. So not reacting, not moving a muscle. So physically stopping, freezing, just freezing. Here, our emotions oftentimes will try to control us and control how we respond in situations. But recognizing that and turning the mind, staying in control. So the first step is really all about just like stopping. And I included this picture of a stop sign. I'm a visual person, so all our visual learners, sometimes even just picturing in those moments a stop sign, right? And what that looks like, the letters there makes it a little easier to remember the steps. So T, take a step back. So mentally, physically, just taking a step back from the situation. And you might have to take several steps back. Take as many steps back as you need mentally, physically, from the situation at hand that's causing you distress. Keep taking steps back until you get unstuck from what is going on. Take a deep breath here, breathe deeply. Continue breathing deeply as long as you need to until you are back in control. Which brings us to the O. We have to be, which stands for observe, as you can see here. We have to be practicing our mindfulness, our core mindfulness skills in DBT are really the foundation of our skills. And they're involved in, I think, all of the 3 other skill modules that we have in DBT. And so even though these are considered distress tolerance skills, we're still practicing our core mindfulness by observing in this moment. So you're gonna be practicing observe throughout our stop skill too. Observing whether you are unstuck from the situation, observing if you're back in control, and then observing what is around you, so your external and internal environment and experience, not jumping to conclusions here, fact-checking in this moment, so gathering the relevant facts to really understand what is going on and what the available options are as you move forward. Considering if we use the example of, say you're in an argument with someone else, observing how you're feeling, observing and considering maybe how the other person is feeling, but really just getting in tune with what your goals are. In our last step here, proceeding mindfully. So asking yourself, what do I want from this situation? What are my goals? What choices might make this situation better or worse? So really brainstorming that in the situation. And once you have your answer, proceeding mindfully and acting in accordance with and behaving in a way that is in alignment with and supports your short and long-term goals in the situation.
I often call this the doorstop skill. If you've ever slammed a door, it makes a big loud bang and startles people, right? And so this stop skill is like a door stop. So you swing the door, but it hits the door stop and it doesn't slam. And that's kind of what this skill is aiming to do. It's kind of interrupting between the impulse and the behavior. It's your doorstop. This way you can, in your perceived mindfully, use other DBT skills or take a break from a situation to prevent us from, making a situation worse. And then this skill can lead into your tip skill, which Cailyn's going to go over in a minute, which is really about decreasing the intensity of an emotion. So the goal is, can you doorstop yourself here and prevent from acting and just give yourself that pause?
Love that doorstop metaphor. That's a good one. So, tip. This is our second crisis survival skill that, again, falls under the umbrella of our distress tolerance skills in DBT. So, T is temperature. And again, tip is all about changing your body's chemistry in order to quickly change or better regulate our emotional experience and de-escalate those intense emotions. So T is temperature, tipping the temperature of your face with cold water. So this can be done by using cold water. I believe it shouldn't be below 50, right? Shouldn't be below 50. And putting your face in a bowl of water, holding your nose, and just sticking your face in it for 30 to 50 seconds. This activates our body's dive response, and there's a lot of research that backs the dive response, and this really taps into and activates our parasympathetic nervous system. So it can be done with a bowl of cold water. It can be done, which also isn't always accessible. So it can also be done with an ice pack, so like a Ziploc bag of ice. My friend was going on a flight yesterday, and flying makes her super anxious and uncomfortable and overwhelmed. And so I was like, oh, you should practice some tip. Probably can't stick your face in a bowl of water on a flight, but you can ask the flight attendant for a bag of ice or a cup of ice, and putting it on your cheeks and your face. If you can't go all in and stick your face in a bowl of water to really activate that dive reflex.
Yeah, and it's really important you do that motion. So when you go down and put your face in water, you lean down and then go up. And without that motion, you're not going to activate that dive response. So really make sure, whether you're using water or ice, that you're putting your face down and coming up. You might feel silly, but in order to get the full oomph of this skill, it's really important we do that motion. And like Cailyn was saying, there's a lot of science behind this temperature piece. When you dive into a pool of water, your body automatically slows down that heart rate to preserve oxygen. And so that's what we're doing. We're tricking your body. We're being real sneaky here. Mm-hmm. And we're pretending we're diving into a pool. So it slows down everything going on. Like Cailyn was saying, if we can activate that parasympathetic nervous system, it'll release some tension. It'll slow down your heart. And hopefully with your heart slowing down and thinking you're going to water, it'll help you regulate your breathing a little bit better, or at least slow down some of your breathing, which will also come up a little bit later in this skill.
Yes, it really is all about tricking your mind, because our body and our mind are so related. So that brings us to our I, intense exercise. So even if it's for a short amount of time, expending your body's stored up physical energy by engaging in some sort of intense exercise. Obviously, maybe not obviously, but usually the longer that we are able, so like say if we're able to go on like a 20-minute run, that's great, but sometimes we're not able to do that in a situation or any given moment. So even doing jumping jacks for a minute, even 30 seconds, usually as longer the better as possible. But even just for a couple minutes, jumping jacks, burpees, walking fast, lifting weights, really getting energy out that way. It releases endorphins and really serves as a vehicle for us to get that pent up energy just out. And intense exercise really demands our body and our minds to kind of focus on that. Like, I don't know about you guys, but burpees, I'm not thinking about anything else than those burpees in that moment. So you can really make it whatever you prefer, whatever kind of exercise, but the goal is to get your heart rate up as much as possible for it to be the most effective.
And this is really great for those activating emotions like anger and anxiety, the ones that like make you come forward, that fill you up with energy. It really helps burn off some of that extra energy to help your body settle. Plus, any form of exercise reduces endorphins, and endorphins make people feel a little bit better, which added bonus to this skill.
Yes, so true. And then our P in tip is pace. There's two P's. Paced breathing. So paced breathing, what's really important about paced breathing to remember is really trying to be aware of the exhale. So our exhale. So really breathing deeply into your abdomen and drawing awareness to your breath and slowing the pace of how you inhale and how you exhale. So on average, 5 to 6 breaths per minute is what we're aiming for. But like I was saying a little bit before, if there's one thing to remember about paced breathing, really try to remember that breathing out, focus on the exhale and try to make it slower and longer than the inhale. And that is because when our exhale is longer and slower than our inhale, that is really what taps into and activates our parasympathetic nervous system. So our calming system. One of my favorites is 4-7-8 breathing. So you inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 7, then you exhale for 8. So it's double. Inhales 4 seconds, exhales 8 seconds. So it's double the amount of time. And again, same with intense exercise. Even if it's for a few minutes, you'll feel that effectiveness of this skill because it almost automatically taps into our parasympathetic nervous systems. And the last P is paramuscle relaxation, which is a variation of progressive muscle relaxation, which is pretty common across just behavioral therapies in general. But in DBT, it is paired muscle relaxation, so a little variation, like I said. So it's the pairing of the muscles, of relaxing our muscles, and maybe I forgot to put tensing in there. It's basically the pairing of tensing and relaxing with breathing out. So really going through, you can go through it body by body part or just groups. So like one foot at a time or just both your feet at one time, but tensing muscle groups, noticing sensations and how that feels when you tense your muscles. And while you're doing that, inhaling and holding your breath at the top of it, and then letting go and relaxing, letting go of the tension while saying the word relax to yourself. That really makes it, it's like an added bonus to the effectiveness of this skill. And while you're doing this, observing and noticing, bringing your awareness to the sensations. As in different sensations, you might notice some areas of your body are more tense than others. Some might be less tense than others. Some might need more energy and focus and love and attention. And just simply noticing the sensations as your muscle tension gradually goes down. And the main goal of our paired muscle relaxation is to increase your awareness of both the tension and relaxation of this exercise, and how that feels both before and after the practice. These are just cute little clip art things that I found that basically, um, it's just short little highlights of what these skills are. Um, yeah, I think I just include them for a fun little visual.
Yeah, so take a screenshot of this and maybe keep it on your phone. I mean, our phones travel everywhere with us. And so if you have like these saved in your images, or I've had people make little albums with like my DBT skill photos. And that way, when you're in distress, you can just pull it up and you don't even think about it. All right, temperature, let me go ahead and do this. Or, all right, I need to stop. What are the steps again? All right, here's the visual. So the more you can prepare ahead of time and take these skills with you, the more likely you're going to use them. All right. So any questions about anything that we have covered related to window of tolerance? Any questions about the crisis survival skills we have gone over? Feel free to throw any lingering questions in the chat. We're happy to answer any other questions people may have. I'll give everyone a second. See if there's any questions left on what we've covered. All right, well, if there was no questions, thank you guys all so much for joining us. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come out and attend our webinar, and feel free to sign up for future webinars or other events we host. We love having you guys. Oh wait, there is one question. I'm sorry. I'm able to complete all these actions but still be stuck in space. So we had another question from someone about dissociation and being stuck. And so one thing that could be really helpful for dissociation is grounding skills. So they're a little bit different than the crisis survival skills, but grounding skills are really helpful in bringing us back to the present moment. So when we dissociate, we often either go somewhere in our brains or we're disconnecting from reality. And what I tend to find most helpful for a lot of my clients who dissociate is utilizing grounding techniques and trying to pull ourselves back into the present moment, and then also using these skills, because a lot of times dissociation happens because we're being triggered, which could be external or internal triggers. And so for dissociating, grounding skills could include things like observing and describing your surroundings. It could be a grounding script such as, my name is Kris. It is November 10th at 5:50 p.m. I am located in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It is 2022 and I'm safe. And repeating that to ourselves. It could be finding everything that's the color blue that you can see, counting other colors, using grounding objects such as ice or poppers or different textures of things. It could be really pushing your feet into the ground and trying to ground to that physical space, or just trying to stretch out your body and get back into your body. Those kind of grounding skills can help reduce the severity of dissociation or bring you back to the present moment more so, in order to make these skills a little bit more effective. Great question. Any other questions from anybody here? Got it. All right. Well, thank you guys all for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night, and we'll hopefully see you again soon. So thanks so much for attending.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming and listening.